You've never seen a dog look embarrassed? Not really. You've seen a dog look guilty, ears back, tail low, avoiding your eyes. But that's not embarrassment. That's fear of punishment. Embarrassment requires something completely different. It requires you to see yourself through someone else's eyes. And of every creature that has ever lived on this planet, only one can do that. You're looking at one right now. Most people assume embarrassment is just a social emotion, something mild, something you feel when you trip in public or mispronounce a word in a meeting. Uncomfortable, sure, but not important, not fundamental. That assumption is wrong. Embarrassment is one of the most sophisticated things your brain does. It is the product of a cognitive ability so rare, so recent in evolutionary terms, that it separates us from virtually every other species on Earth. And understanding why you get embarrassed, why your face heats up, why you replay the moment at 2 a.m. 3 years later, tells you something profound about what humans actually are. Let's start with what embarrassment actually requires. To feel embarrassed, you need to do something no other animal can reliably do. You need to construct a mental model of yourself as seen by another person. Psychologists call this the theory of mind. It means you can hold in your head the idea that other people have thoughts, beliefs, and perceptions that are separate from your own. And crucially, you can imagine what those perceptions look like from the inside. When you trip on a curb and feel your face flush before you've even stood up, your brain has already run a simulation. It has modeled how that moment looked to the strangers around you. It has imagined their internal reaction. And it has compared that imagined reaction against the image you want to project. All of that happens in under a second. Without you asking it to, no other animal does this. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, sharing 98.7% of our DNA, show almost no evidence of this ability. They can recognize themselves in a mirror. A handful of species can. But constructing a detailed internal model of how another mind perceives them, building the kind of self-image that can be damaged by a stranger's glance across a room, that appears to be ours alone. But here's where it gets strange, because this ability didn't evolve so you could feel awkward at parties. In 1998, psychologist Thomas Gilovich at Cornell University ran a now famous study. He put students in embarrassing t-shirts and sent them into rooms full of people. Then he asked each student to estimate how many people had noticed their shirt. The students consistently overestimated, by a factor of roughly 2. They were certain people had noticed. Most people hadn't even looked. Gilovich called this the spotlight effect, the feeling that you are under constant observation, that every stumble, every awkward pause, every visible flaw is being tracked and cataloged by the people around you. And here's the thing, the spotlight effect is not a bug. It is not your brain malfunctioning. It is your brain running a program that kept your ancestors alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Because for most of human history, you were under observation. Constantly. Your ancestors didn't live alone. They lived in small bands of 50 to 150 people. Everybody knew everybody. There was no moving to a new city, no fresh start, no logging off. The people who saw you fail today were the same people you needed to hunt with tomorrow, to share food with next week, to trust with your children next year. Your reputation wasn't a social nicety. It was a survival resource. In that world, being seen as incompetent, untrustworthy, or weak had real consequences. You could be excluded from food sharing, denied access to mates, left behind, cast out. And in a band of hunter-gatherers operating on the edge of survival, being cast out wasn't embarrassing. It was a death sentence. This is why your brain treats social failure the same way it treats physical injury. Neuroimaging studies have shown that social rejection activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same region of the brain that processes physical pain. When researchers at UCLA gave participants social pain relief by administering acetaminophen, ordinary paracetamol, those participants reported lower levels of hurt feelings compared to controls. The painkiller worked on social pain too, because to your brain, there is no meaningful difference. Embarrassment is the early warning system for that pain. It fires before the damage is done. The flush of heat, the sudden awareness of your own body, the desperate urge to explain yourself, these are your brain screaming. Fix this now, before they decide you're not worth keeping around. But there is a second layer to this, and it is stranger than the first. Embarrassment doesn't just require theory of mind. It requires something even more specific. It requires that you care about what you look like to people who don't matter. Think about that for a moment. You can feel crushing embarrassment in front of complete strangers you will never see again. People whose opinion of you will have zero impact on your life. And yet the feeling is identical. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a stranger on a train watching you spill your coffee and the 50 people in your ancestral band whose judgment determined whether you ate. In the environment your brain was built for, there were no strangers. Every face was a known face. Every witness was someone whose opinion had weight. Your brain evolved to treat all social observation as high stakes, because for 300,000 years it was. The stranger watching you trip in the street will forget you in 30 seconds. Your brain doesn't know that. It responds as if you've just fumbled in front of everyone whose opinion of you determines your survival. And then there is the part nobody talks about. The replay. Studies on what researchers call the fading affect bias show that negative emotional memories fade more slowly than positive ones. But embarrassing memories are particularly resistant. They don't just linger, they intrude, unprompted at random intervals, sometimes years after the fact. You're in the shower and suddenly you're back in that classroom, that office, that party, feeling the exact same heat in your face. This isn't your brain torturing you pointlessly. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is running a simulation, analyzing what went wrong, encoding the social lesson so hard that you cannot possibly forget it. Because in the ancestral environment, a repeated social mistake wasn't just embarrassing, it was the kind of thing that got you permanently excluded. Your brain treats that moment from 2019 like a near-death experience, because for most of human history, it would have been. Here's what this means for you right now. The spotlight effect that makes you feel watched is calibrated for a world where everyone watching you actually knew your name. The social pain that feels as real as physical injury evolved in a world where social injury was physical injury. Slower, quieter, but just as lethal. The replay that keeps dragging you back to your worst moments is a survival mechanism running in a world where survival no longer works that way. Every time your face heats up in front of a stranger, you are running 300,000 years of social software in a world that has completely changed the rules. Other animals don't get embarrassed because other animals don't build detailed models of how they appear in the minds of others. They don't have reputations to manage across time. They don't lie awake replaying their failures. They live entirely in the present moment, which sounds peaceful until you realize what it cost. It cost them everything we built. The same machinery that makes you replay the awkward thing you said at dinner is the machinery that built language, cooperation, civilization. The same brain that simulates how you look to a stranger is the brain that could simulate how a hunt would unfold before it happened, how a shelter could be built before a single stone was moved, how the future might look before it arrived. You got embarrassed today, possibly over something small, possibly over nothing. And somewhere in that moment, in that flush of heat and the urge to disappear, was the same mechanism that made us the only species that ever looked up at the stars and wondered what they were. We are the only animal that gets embarrassed. We are also the only animal that ever tried to understand why.